Good morning if you're in California like me. So let's see, today we're going to talk about electricity, but perhaps what's on your mind is he gone? And the answer is we don't know yet. So hopefully tomorrow, but certainly by Saturday. So Ms. Liberty is still hiding behind the structure. But hopefully by Saturday, she can come out again. So today, electricity, and this is actually one of the areas where I'm focusing much of my market design attention and have been for some time. It's a very exciting area right now. Given the developments in the world. And I actually have been working in electricity for a very long time and first got engaged in electricity in a project with Bob Wilson it was actually for the system operator in New England. They asked me to look at their market rules, their initial market rules, and I said I'd be happy to, and asked Bob Wilson, because he had some expertise in electricity, if he would help me with writing a report. So we did. We looked at their market and found all sorts of problems in their market rules and wrote a report explaining the flaws. That was a long time ago. That was 1999, and so over 20 years ago. But now the rules have evolved to a very fine state in many of the markets in the United States, and they've improved elsewhere in the world. But they still have a ways to go in all markets. I would argue that the United States is a bit farther ahead than most places, but I'll let you judge for yourself. This is inside the operator's room at Texas. And it is actually a place where they are just watching to see what's happening and if there's any concerns. So they've got these huge panel displays showing what's happening throughout the system, and they can respond if needed. But more and more, the operators don't engage in anything except for to watch and to stay alert and observe if there's problems. Essentially, the whole system is controlled by algorithms, and it, for the most part, it works quite well and almost never requires any intervention by the operators. That wasn't true 20 years ago, and that's part of the evolution, is that the systems have just gotten much better, and there's been less and less need for any sort of operator intervention. What makes electricity so exciting as an area for market design work is that electricity is undergoing a massive transition in the way energy is generated and consumed. And this is happening on a global basis, absolutely everywhere in the world. We're seeing the fossil fuels being replaced with renewables. We're seeing very rapid development of technologies, lots of innovations. The renewables have quite different characteristics than the fossil fuel plants of yesterday. And so this means that there's lots of new work that needs to be done to create the electricity markets of the future. Now, to date, the electricity markets have focused primarily on the wholesale market, which is primarily what I'll be talking about. And so this is the major market participants, the generators and the service providers on the demand side, the electric utilities. And the consumer has largely been removed from what's going on. So that's why you as a consumer are probably not too familiar with the electricity markets, but they are very sophisticated auction-based markets that run every minute of every day, and they have quite a task that they have to do, balancing supply and demand in every instant. This is a picture of South Australia in December of 2017. This was the largest battery in the world, built by Tesla in 90 days, on schedule. If they didn't complete it in 90 days, it was free. So they were quite motivated to get it done. And it's the sort of innovation that is that we're seeing, and a good illustration. You can also see a wind farm there as well. This is a 100 megawatt battery. And now Vestra in the United States just announced that they're building a 4 gigawatt battery. So this was the largest in 2017. And now we're seeing batteries of 4 gigawatts being built. Quite amazing. So lots of innovation. This is yesterday, where electricity was pretty boring. You basically would look at, you'd plan what the load was, you know, how much demand there's going to be for electricity, and then you would satisfy that demand by building a bunch of coal plants and then some gas peakers to provide greater flexibility. So this is a German coal plant, and these coal plants are becoming dinosaurs pretty slowly in Germany, but hopefully faster eventually. But in the US, they're disappearing a bit faster, largely because of lower gas prices. So gas is pushing the coal aside, but also there's lots of renewable entries, you'll see. So the future is now. We have the technology to completely replace all this fossil plant, and that is happening. It is a process that will take at least a decade and probably multiple decades. The cost and pace at which it takes place is very much dependent upon the electricity market design and the policy, especially climate policy. And so there's very important work to understand exactly how we can achieve our environmental goals at least cost, and what the costs would be if we adopted alternative plans that were perhaps not so good. This is a solar farm in central Texas. Texas, despite being the capital of fossil fuels in the United States, is investing heavily in wind and solar. In fact, all the new build is wind, solar, and batteries, and a teeny bit of gas. And we're having huge retirements of coal. And, oh, and I should say that I serve as an independent director on the board of the Texas electricity system. So that's one of my current roles, which I'm very much enjoying, because Texas is one of the most innovative in and most progressive with respect to the electricity market design, partly because they have a single regulator that is very well behaved, the Public Utility Commission of Texas, whereas all the other markets in the United States and in Europe have multiple regulators, and that can stifle innovation. This is my car in California. It's a Tesla Model S. It has a range of 400 miles, about 600 kilometers. It can charge 200 miles, 300 kilometers in about an hour with supercharging. It's fully autonomous with a software upgrade. So, you know, really quite an amazing vehicle, and it has, in terms of its energy efficiency, 122 miles per gallon equivalent. By contrast, my gas sedan that this replaced had less than 20 miles per gallon. So this is a 6-fold improvement over my smaller gas car. So this is what we're seeing, and what we will see in the future. And I showed the vehicle because it actually is important to electricity in a couple of ways. First, this electric vehicle does nothing for the environment if electricity is generated with coal. And it really only supports the environment if electricity is produced with renewables, or largely with renewables. And so that's going to be the future world. And I mention that because what that means is that electricity, introducing renewables on an aggressive scale and timeline is absolutely critical for addressing climate change. Because not only is electricity a huge emitter of greenhouse gases currently, but the reduction of emissions in other sectors, such as transportation, is dependent upon electrification, and that electrification needs to use renewables. So if you look at electricity and transport combined, that's over half of the world's emissions, and we could effectively bring that to zero quite readily with existing technology, moving to electric vehicles and moving to largely wind, solar, and battery in electricity production. So that is the future. There will be further innovation, of course, that will improve upon what we can do today. But even with today's technology, it's not a problem to accomplish that goal in a relatively short period of time. Here's a charging station. This is a supercharging station 5 minutes from my home. And as I said, very fast charge. Most of the time it charges in my garage. At night, of course, when the electricity rate is quite low. In designing any market, the market designer needs to focus on, first, the goal. And electricity is a very simple goal: reliable electricity at least cost. And I break this down into two components: short-run efficiency and long-run efficiency. Short-run efficiency is making the best use of your existing resources. Long-run efficiency is about motivating investment in the right mix of resources on a long-term basis. And it's this short-run efficiency is rather a technical issue that that we know how to do and we can do fairly well. And I view as a relatively easy problem, although it's incredibly complex. Relatively easy. The long-run efficiency is more challenging, because that means we have to, the way we do it is by having the spot market in the short run send price signals that induce the right investments in the long run. And that's what we're working on. There's lots of challenges. As I said, we have to balance supply and demand at every instant. We've got literally thousands of physical constraints in the network and with the resources that are doing the generation. There are large shocks in supply. Transmission lines will sometimes fail. Generators will have outages. The renewable resources are intermittent. So we might have 20 gigawatts of wind, but on the hottest summer day, that 20 gigawatts of wind might be generating 2 gigawatts, 1/10 of its capacity, because there isn't wind. And solar, of course, comes and goes with the sun in the clouds. There's also an absence of demand response, and that is challenging for the market because we're actually having to do all the price formation on the supply side and facing this unresponsive demand side. And that's one thing that's changing, and actually changes quickly with things like the adoption of electric vehicles. So once you have an electric vehicle, you're extremely motivated in providing some amount of demand response because your vehicle has this huge battery that enables you to engage in smart charging the car when the electricity price is low. And in fact, you can discharge and actually appear as a generator in not today, actually, that hasn't yet arrived, but the cars have that capability, and it's just a matter of allowing that to happen. So that can happen and can happen fairly quickly in the next few years. I suspect it will. So this is going to change, and that's going to help quite a bit, and is actually incredibly important because of the intermittent renewables that cause much larger shocks to supply and demand. And we need a lot of flexibility in order to manage that. And the demand response is going to be a big part of it. The final challenge is climate policy, which I'm going to talk about towards the end of today. And I'll talk about it a little bit throughout the day. But unfortunately, everywhere in the world, we've had a chaotic climate policy. It's changed with political elections. It's been largely based upon directed subsidies to promote certain things. And it's been, to the extent that we've used market instruments, such as the emission trading system, they've had flaws that quite limited their effectiveness. So this is an area where we definitely need improvement because in terms of long-run efficiency, climate policy is of first-order importance. If you're going to spend $1 billion on a electricity generator, the first thing that you want to know is what the explicit or implicit carbon price is for the next 30 years. That's how long your investment's going to live, and its economics are driven on a first-order basis by that carbon price. So it's absolutely critical if we see some improvements there. We have a very good sense now of what a successful market design looks like in electricity. The cornerstone of the electricity market is the spot market. Getting those spot prices right. And a well-designed spot market consists of two components: a day-ahead market, which enables the resources to make plans. They get scheduled for the day, and day-ahead prices are established. The day-ahead market is a financial market. You can make plans based on that is the prices are financially binding, but the quantities are tentative and can change. So that's the way the day-ahead market works. I'll describe it in greater detail in a second, but it is a complicated optimization that has to be solved. But fortunately, we have the tools today to solve the day-ahead market, to identify prices that support the efficient behavior on a day-ahead basis. Then what happens during the day is things change. The wind, we know more about the weather, the wind, we know which resources are failing, and we know what demand is. And so based on those changes, the resources make adjustments, in response to prices. And then in real time, we have the final settlement. And this is both a financial and physically binding market. And this we call bid-based security constrained economic dispatch, where essentially we know what we've got and we generate the electricity in what's called merit order from least cost to higher cost up until we've satisfied demand. And we, of course, it's security constrained means we're respecting all the constraints in the network, which you have to do. So this spot market is coupled with lots of forward trading, which I've emphasized throughout the class, which has enormous benefit in putting the market participants in more balanced positions when they step into the day ahead and real-time market. I should say in Europe, you do have a day ahead market now. You don't have a real-time market like we have in the United States. Instead, you've got this intraday market, so which is a continuous trading market. And then you have a balancing market, which is the closest thing to the real-time market, but it actually has a lot less liquidity in it than the markets in the United States, and so can perform not nearly as well as the real-time market that we have in the US. And the US dispenses entirely with the intraday trading, which is also a good idea in my mind. Okay, so day ahead market, as I said, it's for scheduling the resources to make plans so everybody can make plans for the day. These resources they're huge machines, and they, most of them, especially the legacy fossil fuel plants, they take sometimes multiple hours to start. Starting them can be very expensive, and start a coal plant might cost $80,000, or a large combined cycle plant, gas plant, many tens of thousands of dollars to start. So that's why you need the planning in order to figure out when it should run when you think it should run during the day, and then the system operator knows that you may or may not be there, but he pretty much can count on you being there. And if your plans change, you have to tell them. So it's fine to change plans, but you have to tell the system operator so they know what to do. The market accommodates a very simple yet powerful expression of preferences. So for the fossil fuel resources, they express what are called three-part bids, what their startup cost is. I might, big coal plant, I would say it cost me $80,000 to start. I've got a 1 gigawatt plant, but I have a minimum of 200 megawatts, and it costs me, in order to run it at 200 megawatts, this is my cost. And then you've got your marginal cost curve, which is a weekly increasing piecewise linear marginal cost curve, or supply curve. So the other resources, they may or may not have. Renewables are basically price takers, so they just produce and they take the market price. The system operator forecasts what they're going to be able to do, and what the day ahead and real-time market is going to do then is effectively attempt to satisfy net load at least cost, where net load is the total load minus the generation of all these price takers, the wind and the solar and so on. The day ahead market allows what we call virtual offers and bids. And this is actually very important. When you have multiple markets, like day ahead and then real time, arbitrage between those markets is something that the participants are going to want to do. And because they've got some expectations of what they think the real-time price is going to be. And so if they think the real-time price is going to be higher than the day-ahead price, then that gives them an incentive to actually sell some additional quantity in the real-time market. And the virtual offers and bids enable them to express their views about what they think the price is going to be day ahead versus real time, and effectively shift quantity efficiently to the real time market if they think that that's going to be a better price opportunity for them. And so what this allows, which is really nice, is they get to bid their true economics in the day ahead market, which is a requirement of efficient scheduling and pricing in the day ahead market. But then they can shift their sale from the day ahead to the real-time market in any way they want using these virtual offers and bids. And so that's actually really nice way to give them this easy way to arbitrage between the markets and yet still bid their true economics. And so it works really well. As I said, this is a centrally optimized market with decentralized decision making. So there's literally thousands of decision makers making these decentralized decisions based upon the market rules and the optimization that everyone understands. And this optimization is really nice. It's the economist's dream. You know, what we're doing is maximizing, we're getting all this bid information from both the supply side and the demand side. We are maximizing social welfare subject to transmission and resource constraints. And that is really nice objective. It's a mathematical objective, so it's mathematically formulated, and the optimization is carried out on a whole bunch of servers doing this combinatorial optimization that's necessary. The problem is structured as a very large mixed integer programming problem. When we have when the supply curves are and demand curves are piecewise linear, then we actually have a quadratic objective, linear constraints, and then it's mixed integer because there's these integer constraints about when you're turning on and when you're shutting off, and so on. So that's what makes it a mixed integer programming problem, which is computationally hard. And there's not just a single product. I've been focusing on energy, which is the main product, but there's all these other products that you need in order to maintain reliability. Basically, to make sure that you've got enough flexibility to handle the stuff that happens. When a nuclear plant shuts down, or a large coal plant or a transmission line goes down, then you have to react very quickly. And so the system operator maintains reserves to provide that fairly rapid response to changes in supply and demand. And what we do in this optimization is we jointly optimize all these products simultaneously, both energy and all the reserve products. And the best way to think about it is that we're finding competitive equilibrium prices. They're approximate competitive equilibrium prices because in this non-convex world where we've got these integer constraints, the startup costs and that sort of thing, which are the non-convexity, those mean that there might not be market clearing prices, competitive equilibrium prices that support the efficient outcome. So that's why I say it's approximate. But it turns out that in these markets, things are largely convex. And so the non-convexities tend not to get in the way. And the prices actually do support the behavior that we observe. So that's actually very nice. In the US, which is different than in Europe, we're co-optimizing energy and reserves across the entire system. We are respecting transmission constraints. And so those are built in the optimization. And so the output of the optimization, because of the transmission constraints, if the transmission constraint binds, it means there's going to be a price impact at nodes impacted by those constraints. And what that means is that each node of the network can have a different price. Now, much of the time, the transmission constraints don't bind in any significant way. And so the prices are pretty much the same everywhere throughout the system. That would be the typical case. But then when stuff happens, a constraint may bind and the prices then adjust. So literally this optimization is determining well over 10,000, even just the energy product, well over 10,000 prices for every 5-minute interval for every day throughout the year. So it's quite complex, but the logic of it is quite simple. It really is. All we're doing is maximizing social welfare subject to constraints. We just write down that mathematical problem, mixed integer programming problem. We run it through a solver and get the results, and then tell people that this is the results. You are optimally going to be turning on at this time and generating at this level. And these are the prices that you will be paid. Now, you don't actually have to do that, but you're in this day ahead market, you're taking on a financial obligation to, and so you're actually selling energy or reserves. So you're taking that position, and if you don't perform, let's say you don't generate, then you're going to be buying energy or reserves to satisfy that position in the real-time market. And if you're over generating, then that's fine too. You'll have covered your position, and then you'll be selling some more at whatever happens to be the real-time price. So the day-ahead market is basically establishing these day-ahead prices where you can take a position, but then it's going to be ultimately resolved in real time where you make adjustments in that position. So the difference in Europe is you don't have this, you do optimization, of course. You have to optimize these systems in order to establish a feasible outcome. But what you don't do is you don't have the locational pricing. So Germany has a single German price. And this is very problematic because you've got a lot of load in the south, you have a lot of wind generation in the north, and you've got binding transmission constraints from north to south. And so what happens is every day, the system operator says, okay, here's the German price. And then they realize that that price leads to an infeasible allocation of generation. And so that they, in other words, they have binding constraints that prevent the single price from being economically efficient. And so what they have to do is they have to tell people in the South that are non-economic in the single price world that they have to generate more. So they might turn on some coal plants in the South, And then they might tell some wind, I'm sorry, we just can't use you, so we're going to, we're asking you to generate less, which in the case of wind is just like throwing the electricity out. And of course, the guys need to be compensated to do this. And so what they do in Germany is they do what's called redispatch, where they tell the guys in the south to generate more, they tell the guys in the north to generate less, and they compensate them. The generators in the north get paid extra for generating, and the guys in the north get paid for not generating. And what this does is create terrible incentives because especially in the north, you actually love being paid for doing nothing. So there's actually a huge oversupply of guys wanting to do stuff and then being asked to do, and then being paid to do nothing. And similar inefficiencies in the South. And so what happens is that it induces this gaming behavior that exacerbates the transmission constraints and makes the thing a total mess. And then Brussels steps in and says, well, you can't, the way Germany does the redispatch is cost-based, which pays at least the guys their costs, which are these regulated costs for this redispatch. But Brussels says, no, you can't do that. We want it market-based. And market-based in this world of very bad incentives actually just makes the incentives that much worse. It intensifies the incentives to exercise market power. Now they have the greater ability to exercise market power. And the whole thing is even more costly for the German consumers, which are already paying about, I think it's up to now 5 billion a year in redispatch costs. So 5 billion euros a year. So it's a lot of money. And that's why, one of the reasons why your electricity bills are so high in Germany. And there's other reasons too, such as the solar subsidies, but we'll talk about that later. Okay, one really nice thing about this efficient day-ahead market is, not only does it handle all these non-convexities in a very efficient way, it also is pro-competitive in that it allows, by having the system operator do this central optimization, it allows the small generators to be optimally scheduled. And so it's easier to be a small participant, which encourages entry. And so in the United States, we have more competitive market structure than you have in Europe. So Europe now does have a day-ahead market, but it is much less efficient. And as I said, it's basically optimizing the wrong problem because it's ignoring transmission constraints, which then you cannot ignore in real time. And so it's optimized the wrong problem. So it's not, and unfortunately, optimizing the wrong problem has terrible incentive properties. So anyway, this will all be improved in Europe, but don't hold your breath. I think it's going to be probably multiple decades before they eventually switch to a nodal system like what we have in the United States, which works incredibly well. And there's, it's proven, it's obviously more efficient, and Europe should do it. Why don't they do it? Well, tyranny of the status quo. The basic reason is this pro-competitive aspect, and the incumbents don't like things that are pro-competitive. If you're a large incumbent utility, you're very happy with a less transparent market that's less efficient. You're going to make more money in that market than you are in an efficient market that has more competitive entry. So that's actually the reason, which isn't a good reason, but it's a common reason. Okay, then the real-time market. This is much simpler. This is a the market participants get to adjust their bids based on new information and circumstance, and whatever the bids are that are finally there, the system operator runs another optimization, which is essentially the exact same optimization, except for now a lot of things are fixed because you know, you're either on or you're not, and they can only work in real time with resources that are available, that are on. They can't wait 4 hours for you to start up. So this is that's what makes this a simpler problem. It's you know, essentially all those non-convexities have vanished, and this is just a very large linear programming problem. But the beauty of this is it allows for the efficient settlement of the forward positions that are established through forward trade and through the day ahead market. So you've basically taken positions, and then the final outcome is you've got final physical settlement in real time, which is what happens in all the well-functioning commodity markets. As I said, this is proven, it works really well. The best way to test a market is when it's under stress. In Texas, ERCOT is Texas. It's it's an acronym that stands for the Texas market. Summertime in Texas is really hot. The hot days are 45 degrees Celsius, you know, 115 Fahrenheit. So that requires a lot of air conditioning to support life, and that leads to a lot of demand in those peak summer times. So this is the summer in 2017, and here, so this is the load, and here is the day-ahead price in orange, and the real-time price in blue. And you can see the real-time price is more volatile than the day-ahead price. And that's because you've run out of options in real time. You know, stuff happens, but you don't have the flexibility that you have day ahead. And so scarcity generally appears in real time, and that's when you've got the big jumps in price. But it all works fine. There was one event here at the end of August in 2017, which was a massive Hurricane Harvey, and which dumped nearly 2 meters of rain. That's actually true. You know, 2 meters of rain in over a 5-day period on the Gulf Coast. And so that, and with huge winds, and that took down hundreds of miles of transmission lines, and substations were underwater. And so this is when the hurricane arrived, and there's a spike up in the day ahead market because there's, you know, things are really nasty, but the real-time price stayed low because actually it all worked out. So through that entire hurricane, the market performed perfectly. There were some outages because of distributional issues, but essentially the loss of transmission lines, the loss of substations, the system operator just kept running the market. It worked just like normal, making recommendations and sending out prices. But it really is decentralized decision-making. The individual market participants are submitting their bids and offers. They get to bid what they want, and and then they get to do what they want. There's simply going to be this settlement, which is based upon the prices that are determined by the system operator. Okay, so then one thing that's very important in this market is shortage pricing. And shortage pricing is what happens, this is especially important as a backstop when you don't have demand response or enough demand response. Because what you want is for the energy and reserve prices to go extremely high during shortages. So because then you're actually forced to shed load, and so the shortage price should be the value of lost load, which in Texas we take to be $9,000 per megawatt hour. So that's a lot. So normally the normal price is around $30. So this is 300 times the normal price. So it's a huge increase in price. And that's important because that's what motivates the supply side and the demand side to take actions to, as we get into these near shortage situations. And what we do is, rather than have the price go from some small number like $30 to jump up to 9,000, what we do is we actually have this continuous function which quickly goes up to $9,000 as we near shortage. And that's called the operating reserve demand curve, which basically puts a very high, it's a penalty factor in the optimization, a very high price adder to all the reserve and energy products during this near shortage situation. And the way to think about it is, it's, theoretically it should be this value of lost load, which is taken to be $9,000, multiplied by the loss of load probability, which goes to 1 as you hit a shortage situation. And you can't actually operate the system with no reserves. You have to have some quantity of reserves, or you would have complete blackout of the system. So you actually start shedding load, shutting off some of your customers well before you run out of reserves. And the minimum level of reserves in Texas, which is a large system. Texas is about the size of Germany in terms of electricity. We're around 80 gigawatts peak, which is about the same as Germany. And so we've got this minimum of 2 gigawatt reserves that's required. So this is what the curve looks like. So between 0 and 2 gigawatts, we have $9,000 price, which is the value of lost load, and then it falls off steeply as we add additional reserves. And over time, this curve will adjust as in response to volatility. So if you've got lots more intermittent renewables, then you're going to have either a higher minimum, or you'll want to shift these out in order to maintain reliability. But the idea of this curve is this is effectively the consumer's preference for reliability. That's the best way to think about it. And so if you want a more reliable system, then the way you would increase this price or shift this curve to the right. And what that would do is give more shortage, more scarcity pricing revenues to the generators, which would induce more investment. So you would have additional reserves. That's the way it works in an energy only market. If you have a capacity market, you want to have this same thing, but then you, in addition, have a capacity market which is going to, the product is going to require, the product is basically an obligation to provide energy or reserves during shortage. And so this is effectively is the going to be the price determinant during these near shortage situations. And that's going to be relevant in terms of pricing any deviations from failing to fill your obligation or overfilling your obligation. Then this is the price that's going to penalize or reward you based upon your behavior if you happen to have a capacity market. So essentially, this is absolutely essential whether or not you have capacity market or your energy only market. It's not just relevant for an energy only market. It's the cornerstone of reliability in any electricity market. It changes, as I said, over time. The change here in Texas is, you can see it shifted out a little bit in the last 2 years. And the reason for that is, one, there were a lot of retirements of coal units, which are very large units in Texas, and which is a great thing. But that led to a very low reserve margin. And as a result, the regulator was a little bit nervous and so wanted to shift things out. But really the bigger reason is that at the same time, the regulator wanted to introduce real-time co-optimization of energy and reserves, which makes the real-time market more efficient. But that improved efficiency in the real-time market actually takes revenues away from the generators. And so this was a political compromise. We make the real-time market more efficient, taking some money from the generators, giving more money to the, it's effectively a shift in wealth from generators to the demand side, consumers. And so this was a way to pay back the generators, to keep them happy. So they got some more scarcity rents. Okay, so but that very high price during shortages is super important in motivating behavior. This is actually one time when we had this was the summer of 2019, where we actually had a shortage event. And so the price is going all the way up to $9,000 on 8/13. And there was another event on 8/15. And both of these, you can see the demand response, that this peak, so normally this curves, is a nice curve like that, concave, and same thing here. And what it did in these emergency days, when the price went up to $9,000, that's this purple one and the gray one, is it just shaved off this the peak. So that's all the demand response. So it was, and that's doing its job. So in the long run, there's going to be a lot more demand response because of the adoption of electric vehicles and adoption of smart home technology. Yes, so essentially, we're going to have more and more demand response in our future world. The good market design is going to enable that. And that's going to be a very good thing, because then this backstop of the shortage pricing is really not going to be necessary. Consumers will be able to directly express their preference for energy during these shortage situations, and we will have robust demand response, and then the backstop will never be hit. We'll never reach $9,000. As it turns out, we rarely reach it. So in the last 10 years in Texas, there's just been 2 instances, one in 2011, which there was just incredibly nasty weather. Unbelievable peaks in both heat and cold in the winter that led to massive spikes in demand that and there was some amount of load shedding, but not very much. And then again in 2019, we had these 2 events on the 13th and 15th of August, where the price reached $9,000 for about an hour and a half. So it was, isolated, very high prices, very little load shedding, and really extreme events. By contrast, California recently had outages that were much longer duration, and they had inadequate demand response because they didn't let the price go above $600. So it's just one of the problems in the California market, which needs to be fixed. Forward contracting, very important, and this shortage pricing actually induces a lot of forward contracting, and that's a good thing because it puts parties in more balanced positions. It avoids things like the California energy crisis, where the utilities went bankrupt because they had obligations to serve load at fixed prices, and the wholesale price they were paying for the electricity was much higher. And so they quickly went bankrupt, and that's the market basically ends when one side of the market can't pay their bills. So forward contracts, hugely important for balanced positions and managing risk and avoiding market failure. This just shows that most of the energy is traded well before the day ahead market. This is the real time, the real time market. This shows that about 10–12% is unhedged going into real time. So the vast majority, 85 to 87%, is hedged going into the real time market. The forward prices are a great way to look at what's happening to the market. So here's and what you want to look at is the August price, which is our peak, where you get the peak load, where we're going to, if we're going to have any shortages, they're going to tend to occur in August. And so this is basically showing these normal years where it stays, the forward price stays low. As I said, it's typically around $30, but in August it's higher because of the peak. So the forward price is more like around $50. But you can see in 2018, as we're approaching the summer in 2018, the price goes incredibly high. And what that does in the springtime, what that does is it sends a very strong signal that people are anticipating shortages in August. And you really want to have your generating units tuned up. So during this period here, the folks are doing maintenance of their machines, so tuning them all up so they're going to be all ready to go, and they're going to work properly in August, which is exactly what happened. So then we got to August, and actually the forward price dropped off to normal levels, and there wasn't scarcity because there was a very low outage rate in August. And so that's basically markets working, which is wonderful. Say a few words about investment. If we look at the Texas market, this is the net revenues that a combustion turbine, which is a peaker, would achieve in the Texas market in all these years. The only market, this is the cost of new entry, annualized. And the, so looking at this combustion turbine would only make money in 2011. They're actually losing money in all the other years. So it's a very competitive market. In reality, actually, these combustion turbines are not, they're sort of taken as the marginal entry in your typical market, but in fact they aren't anymore. There's plenty of gas turbines, and they're not being built in most markets now. The entry that you're seeing, if you're going to see fossil entry, it's going to be a combined cycle plant, and that is much more efficient, and these are now very flexible. So they have the flexibility of the gas turbines, but they're much more efficient, and so that's what's being built. If it is fossil, but it's actually very little. So and what we're seeing is the reserve margins are very modest in Texas, but they are manageable. So they work just fine. Many markets in the United States and in Europe have a capacity market, which ERCOT does not have, Texas does not have, and we're energy only. And that works fine in Texas, I think largely because we have a lot of industrial load and that does respond to price. And so we've got more demand response than in any of the other markets. Most of the markets have a capacity market to coordinate investment. And I've been very much involved in designing the capacity markets. They would, initially they didn't listen to me, and so they would do things that didn't make sense, and they had problems and they didn't work. And so then eventually they listened to me, and they adopted proper capacity markets. But it was actually a long process. They had to basically build something that didn't work and then see that it failed. And then finally they would do what I initially recommended, which is to define the product as the ability to deliver energy or reserves during shortage events. So that, and you have that obligation. To the extent you do your obligation, then you're rewarded, or if you do more than your obligation, you're rewarded. If you do less, you're penalized at very steep, at this high shortage price. And that gives the parties a strong performance incentive. The problem with the original capacity market is they basically defined capacity as iron in the ground. What was, how much, what's the nameplate on your generating unit? And that doesn't provide any performance incentive to generate electricity during shortages. And that's what contributes to reliability. So they basically just misdefined the product. But ultimately they realized that what they were doing wouldn't work or didn't work. And so then they adopted this approach, which works fine. Now, the challenge for the market going forward, which I'm going to spend the rest of, or much of the morning, we're going to talk about climate policy too, but much of the morning here, my morning, is the challenges that we face when we've got a large quantity of renewables, which hopefully we'll get to very soon. So my response, some folks say that, well, wholesale electricity markets just won't work anymore, and we need actually an entirely different model. And I completely disagree with that. The model actually works just fine. We just have to make sure that we fully integrate the new technologies of wind and solar and batteries. And if we do that and we accommodate demand response, then the market will work just fine. And I'm working actually together with Emanuele on a project which is going to demonstrate that it actually does work fine and provides a least cost solution. So which should be the gold standard as we move forward. But we certainly do need greater flexibility to accommodate a huge amount of intermittent renewables. And for this, we need nodal pricing. So this is one thing that Europe's going to have to come to grips with eventually. It's really important that the locational constraints are going to appear more and more as a result of the making greater use of the network. I'll show you a picture of this in just a moment. As I said, pretending there's no congestion just doesn't work. Oh, actually, I overstated what the cost is to the consumers in Germany. It's not 5 billion. It's more like, in 2018 anyway, it was 1.5 billion. So, but still, that's a significant amount of money, the redispatch cost. And if Germany is forced to adopt the Brussels rules of market-based redispatch, that number is going to go up too. So, so you need the nodal pricing and you need the shortage pricing to motivate the guys to provide the flexibility, and then all will work well. I do want to emphasize how important electricity market design is. It really matters. And I want to give just an illustration from the United States based on my recent experience. So I just moved from Washington, D.C. to California. Alternatively, I could have moved to Texas. Had I moved to Texas, I would have done the same thing. I would have gotten my electric vehicle. We went from 2 gas cars to a single electric vehicle, which we love. And but then I would want to choose a plan that enabled me to take advantage of the huge battery that the electric vehicle has. And in particular, I'd want to charge when I'm paying a very low price. And Texas has a very good program of retail competition where there's literally hundreds of service providers I can choose from. And 2 of the service providers offer what to me is the perfect plan for me, which is one of them is provided by Evolve Energy, which actually was just acquired by a European energy company, Octopus. And so it's changing its name to Octopus Energy. But they'll have the same plan. The plan in Texas is I pay $10 a month plus the wholesale cost. And the wholesale cost is about 9 cents per kilowatt hour. So I'm paying, and it consists of the real-time price, which is about 3 cents. And then there's the transmission and distribution charges, and then some taxes. So you add it all up and it's a little bit less than 9 cents. So that's what would happen in Texas. But I didn't move to Texas, I moved to California. And so California, I have a monopoly utility that I have to deal with, San Diego Gas and Electric. And so it's the only choice. They do offer a number of different plans. I think there's like 8 different plans. And one of the plans is specifically designed for electric vehicles like mine. So this is the best plan that I can adopt. And this plan is $16 a month plus about 36 cents per kilowatt hour. So 400% more than Texas, which is impressive. So my bill in Texas would be $125 a month. my bill here is $500 a month. So that's real money. I mean, that's a real difference. Consumers notice that. And why is it so expensive? And the reason is because of mistakes in market design. Actually, the wholesale cost of electricity here in California is about the same. It's about 3 to 4 cents per kilowatt hour. It's that the distribution, transmission, and taxes part is just astronomical because of policies that California has adopted with very good intentions. And so I wrote a op-ed for the local paper here, the San Diego Union Tribune, pointing out, this happened during the blackouts. I had, okay, I've got enough. So you're charging me 36 cents a kilowatt hour. And then I have blackouts because it's a hot day. And it wasn't even that hot. So anyway, I was kind of annoyed. So I wrote this op-ed, and it points out two huge flaws in the California market that make it unsustainable. The biggest one that's contributing most to that incredibly high price is what's called net metering, where if you're a wealthy person and you've got this multi-million-dollar home, what you do is you put solar panels on the roof, and then you basically just get charged for your net consumption, which could be around zero. And what that means is that all the distribution transmission charges, that huge component, is you're basically avoiding. You get to free ride on everyone else. You get to enjoy that distribution transmission network to provide reliable electricity for you when the sun is not shining, but we're not going to charge you anything for that. And so what happens is it's basically this huge wealth transfer from wealthy people to from poor people to wealthy people. The poor people can't afford the large capital investment to put solar panels on their roof. And as a result, that huge fixed cost gets borne by a smaller and smaller group of people as more and more put solar panels on their rooftops. And so that's one reason. And I have a historic home, so I can't put solar panels on my rooftop. The second is the fact that we've got this monopoly utility, and I can't choose a plan that would enable me to make better use of this huge battery I have in my car. So yes, it does give me some ability to charge during the middle of the night, but what I would really like to do is use that battery to serve my load during the daytime when the price is high, and then all my consumption would take place at night when the price is low. But I can't do that because I'm not offered such a plan, because there isn't competition in the retail market. This picture shows what's happening in Texas, but it's very similar to what's happened in Germany with respect to the introduction of renewables. So what you have is, first, where are we having load growth? So this is looking to the future. Where are we experiencing load growth? That's those dark regions here. Well, that's basically the urban centers in Texas. And where are, and so that's and the ones that are growing faster, you can think of Germany, it's like Munich is growing faster. And but it's basically the urban centers that are growing. Where are we having exits? from the legacy thermal units, especially the coal units, well, they were built around the urban centers, and so they're vanishing. And where are we building the renewables? Well, we're building it where the wind blows, and which is out west. And you're doing the same thing in Germany. Most of your wind is coming from the north, and so then it's having to travel along these transmission lines, and congestion is going to be more of an issue. So Texas is experiencing the same thing. Every market is. That's sort of the nature of the transition. And that's why efficiently pricing transmission is going to be very important, and why a move to nodal pricing is quite desirable. So now let me turn to climate policy. And this is something, as I said, is of first order importance to anybody thinking about investing in a generating resource. And what we do really does matter. And what we've done so far is actually not worked. This is the entire world. This isn't Texas. This is the entire world. So globally, this is what our emissions look like in total. And you can see we're not doing too well. We should be ramping these down quite quickly to have sustainable development, but we're not. We just can keep going up, up, up. So it is problematic. We need to be turning this corner, and maybe with COVID now we're going to turn the corner temporarily because of the downturn of the economy, but we really must turn this around, which means getting rid of coal and reducing the amount of gas as quickly as possible, and bringing in renewables and storage in order to satisfy the net load in our future world. So that's what we need to do, and hopefully we will do it. This actually is another. This is a picture looking at the investment incentives, and peaker net margin is essentially the amount of money that the peaker earns during the year based upon the high, when there's high prices, it generates and makes money. And so this is going to be a increasing function until the end of the year. And so the end of year total is sort of how much money the peaker makes. And as you see, again, this is another similar picture. There's just been the 2 years, 2011 and 2019, where we had sufficient shortages that the peakers would be making money. Here's the cost of new entry. And every other year they're losing money, and yet we're still seeing very robust investment, which is great. Well, what's coming in the Texas market? So now I'm turning back to Texas. That prior picture was Texas as well. Well, it's solar, a wind, and I'm sorry. So this is the solar, and the colors represent the different, how far along they are in the process of entry. There's a number of stages that you go through, but the solar is huge. There's lots of solar coming in, quite a bit of wind still, storage, and a little bit of gas, and that's it. So that's very nice. Things look good. And historically, what has come in for the last 10 years has all been wind and solar, but predominantly wind, because wind was much lower cost. Solar, it's only recently become low cost, and also the economics of solar in Texas are especially desirable because the solar covers the peak hours of the day, whereas the wind, there tends to be less wind during the peak hours of the day. So that's one reason why solar is especially desirable now that its cost is sufficiently low. So things are looking good in Texas as we look forward. And I should say that unlike California, Texas is not a green loving state. Texas does what makes economic sense. They don't say, well, we're going to do this for the environment. They're doing this because it makes economic sense. This is the least cost investment right now in Texas as they look forward, anticipating the future. Looking at the entire United States, the picture looks like this in terms of plan, very similar. A lot of wind, a lot of solar, a little bit of gas. In terms of retirements, things look very nice. The coal is going away. Vestra actually just announced 8 gigawatt retirements of coal over the next several years, which is huge. That's 10% of the market in Germany. Natural gas is going as well. Wind is becoming so much more efficient that some of the older wind is being replaced with more efficient wind that have higher mass and longer blades, which leads to a higher capacity factor. So that all looks good. So, it seems like, well, geez, problem solved. We've had zero climate policy in the United States over the last 4 years, and look what people are doing. It looks pretty good. But the answer is, well, it's not quite as good as you think, because this is the resource mix currently in the United States. It's a lot of gas, a lot of coal with a little bit of renewable and nuclear. And the reality is those changes coming from new build and retirements, in any year currently, it's at less than 4% of the total. So yes, we are moving in the right direction based purely on economics, but we're not moving very quickly. And so what an effective climate policy can do is make us move much more quickly. And the effective policy, which economists have complete consensus on, is carbon pricing. We need to price carbon. This emitting greenhouse gases has a social cost, and we need to price that social cost. This has not been very popular in the United States. It's been much more popular in Europe, but we are getting to the point where it's starting to become popular in the United States. And I very much hope that we'll learn on Saturday that we had a change in the White House, and that's going to have a very large shift in our climate policy in the United States. So fingers crossed. We are already seeing a shift even in today's world before transition in the White House. And this is our federal regulator, FERC, of energy, and they just held a conference on carbon pricing. And all the experts that spoke, there was effectively a unanimous consensus that carbon pricing was the way to go. FERC, shortly after this technical conference, established a rule that allowed the states to pursue a carbon pricing approach, that was consistent with the federal regulation. And what we'll see, hopefully, is national leadership on this front once the White House shifts. So one thing that I've been very involved with, together with Emanuele and my other co-authors, is developing a very sophisticated and powerful tool with which to understand how the energy transition depends on market rules and policies. And this is very much it's not something that happens overnight. It needs to be a long run model. It's not a steady state. We're modeling this transition from largely fossil fuels to nearly entirely renewables. And so it's that multi-decade transition that we're interested in modeling. So it can't be a steady state model. And because of the vast shift in the structure of resources, we're having to model the energy market, which is explicitly model the energy market, which is incredibly difficult animal, but nonetheless, we're able to do it. And so that's what I want to talk to you about. And the, actually looking at the time, what I want to do is take a 10-minute break, and then I'll come back to this model, which is then I'm going to explain the model as quickly as I can, and then say a few words about climate policy, which is this is a perfect segue to climate policy, because that's going to be one of the main uses, is we can actually see what the cost is of a sensible least cost climate policy, the first best, versus a some of the alternatives that people are throwing out. Good. Okay, welcome back. So in this second half, we will finish up our discussion of the current research that I'm doing on the energy transition, and then talk about climate policy very quickly. So as I said, this is a long run model that we're building, and it's basically modeling, and we're modeling PJM, which is the largest electricity market in the world. It's in largely the Northeast, although it extends all the way to Chicago. It's about almost twice the size of Germany, or twice the size of Texas. Very big market. And our energy market model is a micro model of all the energy resources and the demand. And so it's very detailed. And what we're modeling is the entry and exit decisions of investors over a multi-decade period. The investors are forward-looking, so they're calculating their net present value from a particular investment, anticipating where they think prices are going to go in the future, and of course subtracting out their costs. And what's going to happen in the model is the most economic units are going to enter, and the least economic unit, the unprofitable units, are going to exit. And we're both considering with a capacity market and without a capacity market. With the capacity market, that's essentially going to coordinate the entry to so that there's going to be sufficient net entry to satisfy a reserve requirement or a reserve margin. And but it can also be an energy only market where, in fact, we just have the folks entering access based upon the money that they can earn in the energy and reserve markets. We find an approximate equilibrium, that is we run the capacity market until the expectations are consistent, but we can't exactly, have perfectly consistent. It's going to be approximately consistent. And at that point, we'll stop, and that's sort of the equilibrium investment levels over time based upon the assumptions that we're making with respect to costs, carbon price, all these things. As I said, we have to model the energy market because the resource structure is changing enormously over these multiple decades. And so we have to understand what the energy profits will be for these resources in environments that differ radically from what we have today. And so that's the need to do this micro modeling of the energy market, where we're actually solving the day-ahead market, that large mixed integer programming problem, and then determining the real-time dispatch on a 5-minute basis in real time. And we're doing this for each of the 5-minute intervals for the year for many years. The investment decision is going to be taking place on an annual basis. So once a year, the parties will decide whether to enter or exit, and but then the energy market will run on a 5-minute basis. Entry and exit's a long-run decision. So the plants typically last for 15 to 40 years. The state space in which we're doing this is infinite dimensional. Lots of different new resource types are coming in. The resource, we consider 15 different resource types. There's various market rules that we model. Climate policy we're going to model in a very simple, straightforward way. We are going to have price responsive demand. We recognize that the technologies are evolving. Some are evolving more than others. So battery technology is evolving quite a bit. Wind, we've pretty much down that learning curve, so it's not going to change very much, but all of them are going to be improving over time. And then of course, there's fuel prices as well. Two big simplifying assumptions. One is we are going to assume that transmission constraints don't bind, that there's planning, and that the planning results in the build of transmission that is largely consistent with need. And so we don't have persistent binding transmission constraints. Of course, in practice, we would have little binding constraints because of local constraints, but it's impossible for us to model that. And so we don't. The other thing we don't do is we assume that the bids are largely competitive, and the market that we're working with and many of the other markets in the world are highly competitive. And so that's a reasonable assumption. But what we do notice is that during certain types of units do offer what's called hockey stick bids, where they offer the end of their capacity at very high prices. That's less seen in markets like Texas, where we have the operating reserve demand curve, which automatically pushes the price up when we're near shortage. But in markets, so Europe doesn't have that. And so this is, the exercise of market power is what leads to the higher prices during near shortage situations. And in PJM, where we're doing this, they also are introducing now an operating reserve demand curve. So that's what we're modeling. Climate policy is going to be through the carbon price. So the investors will anticipate a carbon price path over the life of their plant. One can interpret this carbon price as either implicit or explicit. Right now it's more implicit, but it could turn into an explicit carbon price in the future. All the companies today are making assumptions about the carbon price, not in our model, in the real world, are making assumptions about the future carbon price when they make investment decisions. They have to. It's of first order importance. And so they do it. So Exxon's got a carbon price path that they're using for their investments. All the energy companies do. RWE does. Everybody does. The model has 4 components. And I'm going to run through the 4 components fairly quickly. The first is the model of net load forecasting. And so here we're estimating load in the market over multiple decades on a 5-minute basis. And then we're subtracting out the wind and solar generation, which depends upon the investment decisions, of course. But that's fine. So for any quantity of renewables, we just subtract it. We estimate the wind, we estimate the solar, and we appropriately subtract it from load to get the net load that the rest of the resources has to serve to balance supply and demand. The forecast is done actually more than a day ahead, 36 hours ahead, and then every hour right up until real time. So it's actually lots of forecasts that are getting more and more refined as we get closer to real time. And then we have the real-time realization. Okay, that's this piece. That, of course, is going to feed into the energy market model, which is going to run the mixed integer program and the linear program in order to, with the resources that are available, balance supply and demand, serve the net load. And that might be the end of it, with the addition of this capacity market model where they're making the investment decisions. But the challenge here is this is very computationally expensive. So we have to do a huge amount of work computational work in order to run the energy market for a year to find out what the energy profits and reserve profits are for a resource operating in this resource structure with this carbon price and this fuel price and so on. And the way we, the good news is that we can actually do this. 10 years ago, there's no way we could even do this. But nowadays, with the latest computers and the latest algorithms, we can actually do about, so we have 22 high-end servers in Finland that are running this energy market model. And they can do, for this micro PJM market, where we're modeling every resource in PJM, it can do the full year on these 22 servers. We can do about 1,000 years of runs, which is pretty amazing. So we get 1,000 instances run in a day on the 22 servers. And that's good because that means we can generate a lot of data about how energy profits depend upon resource structure and all the other variables. So that's very nice. But still, it's not going to be possible to simply use the net load forecast, run the energy market model, and then think about the investment decisions. Because essentially, when we get it here, this capacity market model, we're going to have to make a lot of calls to identify what the energy profits are for a particular resource structure and other circumstances. Because we're doing this over multiple decades, and we're trying to find consistent expectations and so on. So we estimate that this is on the order. This will require on the order of 50 million calls to the energy market model. And so if we were to do actually 50 million energy market runs. Okay, so if we can do 1,000 a day, then 50 million is going to take many years. So that's not good. We don't have that kind of time. So that approach isn't going to work. So instead what we do is we run the energy market model for several weeks and generate, let's say, 50,000 instances. And with that 50,000, that's a lot of data with which to econometrically estimate what the energy market rents are in various circumstances that we don't actually run. And so that's what this energy market proxy is. It's basically a econometric model, a very sophisticated econometric model that can estimate what the energy profits would be for this resource in this resource structure with these other parameters. And that's what the capacity market model is going to be calling 50 million times, because this is basically just doing some simple arithmetic. Once you've got your model done and constructed based upon all the data that you're getting here, then these calls are very inexpensive. So that means that then we can run the capacity market model in a few days rather than in many years, and that's a good thing. And I should say that one of the things that we've really worked on is making the energy market proxy be as good as it can be using various techniques. For example, we split the energy profits into two components: the normal profits and the peak profits, and that happen near shortage situations, because those are both different, driven by fundamentally different forces. So we have separate econometric models for those two things. And then we further use some machine learning techniques to cluster our environment into different branches, which then can more effectively address some of the nonlinearities that we see in the energy profits. And so there's actually a lot of work, interesting econometric work that's done here. And then this is basically a lot of very sophisticated math programming optimization that we're doing here. But it's quite elaborate. It's quite sophisticated, especially with respect to some of the resources, which I'll talk about. So I've already discussed the load forecast model. I won't say more about that. And I think I've given you the idea of the energy market model as well, modeling both the real co-optimizing energy and reserves, both day ahead and in real time. And as I said, it's computationally expensive, so we need lots of servers, but fortunately not too many. We just have 22. Interestingly, the system operators, Texas, for example, has 3,400 servers. So that gives you a sense of how much computation is necessary to solve these very big problems. They have a lot of redundancy, and they're doing a lot more things than what I was able to describe today. Okay, one of the points I want to make is that it's actually not going to be possible to run to have 100% renewable that's just using, say, wind and solar. That won't give you enough flexibility. And just to illustrate that, and you'd have to grossly overbuild the wind and solar. So here's just a scenario where we're adding 15 gigawatts of renewables every year starting in 2035. So by 2060, we've gotten to the point where we've got something like, well, let's see, I guess, yeah, by 2060, we're here. So that's about 150 times 3, because there's solar, onshore, and offshore wind. And so we've got 3 times, the whole market's 150 gigawatts. So we've got 3 times the capacity nameplate as what we need to service the peak load in PJM. And then the interesting thing I wanted you to look at is what net load is with that huge overbuild in 2060. Having 3 times the capacity that's seemingly necessary based on the nameplate. And what happens is when you look at the peaks here, the peaks are around 100 gigawatts, and which normally they would be of load is around 150. So we're actually still having to, in this world, we would still have to have some way of covering 100 gigawatt peaks, because the solar and wind are not doing hardly anything. And that's sort of the nature of the beast. But even if you had like 8 times what you needed according to nameplate, you wouldn't be able to remotely satisfy the load. And then if we look at, this is July, the peak month, but if we look at April, a shoulder month where the load is light, what we find is that the load is negative all the time. So the net load that we have to serve is negative all the time. And sometimes substantially, 100 gigawatts negative. So, in practice, what would happen is if you actually had this, is people would be mining Bitcoin or doing something, to consume the electricity, which is what we actually have today. In Texas, we have, even though electricity is, on average, it's, moderately expensive in Texas at 3 cents a megawatt, 3 cents a kilowatt hour. But at times it can be very inexpensive. And in fact, the price can be negative. And so there's actually these Bitcoin farming outfits that are mining not just Bitcoin, but other cryptocurrencies during those instances where the price has turned negative. So we sort of automatically see the demand, this demand response jump into the market in a very useful way. Okay, so the thing that's going to make this work and address that problem that I just illustrated is storage. We have to have a lot of storage. And in Texas and in most of the world, this is going to come from batteries, at least for now, until there's some better technology. But, the exception is Norway. Norway's got huge hydro reserves that are, basically huge hydro reservoirs that are basically giant batteries. So they've got storage in spades, and that's very nice, and that greatly simplifies their system. In fact, I have the view that a lot of the flaws in the European system have actually come from Norway because they were sort of suggesting that the rest of Europe should do what they do in Norway, which works really well in Norway when you've got these huge batteries, but doesn't work so well in markets where there's much more serious short-term shortage situations as you have in continental Europe. Well, farther south from Scandinavia. So storage is a really interesting animal. At first glance, you might think, well, storage is either, it's 2 things. It's sometimes it generates by, you can look like generation when it discharges into the grid. And then when it's charging, it's a load. So you could model it as 2 separate things. It's a generator or it's a load, but that's not actually the way you want to model it. It's actually, it needs to be modeled in a fundamentally different way than you model load resources or generating resources. And that's because the way you want to model it is, yes, it's this device that can charge or discharge, but it's marginal cost, unlike a generator, that might have a marginal cost based upon the gas price. So it's, basically constant. The marginal cost of a battery is the opportunity cost of discharging now rather than later. And so this is very much dependent upon its price expectations and its current state of charge. And what we do in our model, which is more sophisticated than what any of the markets do currently, is we explicitly model the battery characteristics and optimize their charging and discharging explicitly and directly in both the day-ahead market and in the real-time market. And that's what the wholesale markets are going to need to do in the future, but none of them are there yet. The best markets right now let the battery resources offer their opportunity cost, but they don't help them calculate that opportunity cost. Whereas in our model, the central optimization is effectively determining those opportunity costs. They never have to be bid. You just bid the characteristics of your battery, which are much simpler. You basically 3 components. It's got this discharge rate, this charge rate, and this much capacity. And that's it. And then once you give it the system operator those components, then it's going to tell you, when you should be charging and discharging in order to make as much money as possible. Price responsive demand is also going to be incredibly important in the future world. It's not so important now, but it will be. One reason it's not so important now is almost all of us consumers are facing a fixed price per kilowatt hour. And so we actually have no incentive to respond to price because price is completely boring. But the future world is going to expose the consumer, at least on the margin, to the real-time wholesale price. And at least some segment of the population that wants to be exposed. And if you have an electric vehicle, you want to be exposed to the real-time price because your car has automatically the capability to charge and discharge in smart ways. So it's a great way to save money on your electricity bill. We model the price responsive demand as basically coming in. As I said, it'd be natural to assume that it comes in with electrification of transport, but it will come in as people adopt smart home technologies. Even things like the Nest thermostat is incredibly helpful in taking advantage of the price volatility that is seen at the wholesale level. Okay, and I said a few words about the energy proxy model. I'm not going to say anything more. It's just there is a lot to talk about here, but we don't have the time. So I'll skip over that. So the capacity market model, we actually run it for much longer than we're really interested in about 40 years, 4 decades. But we're going to run it for an extra 50 years beyond that. And the reason we do that is that then we don't have to establish some sort of continuation value for the resources that are investing, let's say in year 39 of this 40-year sequence. So they're going to actually see a full 50 years beyond when they invest. And that will enable them to, that'll mean that we don't have to calculate continuation values. They'll actually see what their profits are going to be over time. And we don't have that sort of the end game problems that we would if we didn't have such a long horizon. So, and once we build the model, it's just a matter of running the model for longer. So it works out. Okay, as I said, 15 resource types, including several types of batteries. So that's perhaps the most interesting is you can describe a battery with its charge rate, discharge rate, and its duration. And so, you know, and most batteries have the same charge and discharge rates. And so then at 100% capacity, you can figure out if, based upon its nameplate, or it's, you know, let's say it's a 100 megawatt charge and discharge. If it's got an 8-hour duration, that means it would be a 800 megawatt hour battery. And if you're building these things, you actually want to optimize 1, 2, 4, or 8 hour based upon the how much volatility, the form that price volatility takes. Because basically the storage unit, it's basically a price arbitrager. It's going to arbitrage across time in order to make money. And so it loves price volatility. And depending upon that form, in Texas, we have a lot of low duration batteries. And that's because the Texas real-time price has very high volatility. And the scarcity events are very short in duration. And so with a 1 or 2 hour battery, you can basically cover almost all the scarcity events. By contrast, California has much less price volatility and much longer shortage events. And so there you want to build these longer duration batteries. So we basically are going to have, what gets built is going to be endogenously determined by the model, what's most profitable. So we'll actually see that, and which, you know, it depends upon things like the scarcity pricing form that takes. So if it's, you know, if it's more extreme, so you raise the value of lost load, or you bump in, you shift the curve out to the right, you're going to have more scarcity events, and that are shorter in duration, and creating very high volatility for short instances. And then you're going to get these shorter duration batteries as being the most economic. So that's why we include that variety. Lots of things to calibrate. So we've taken great care in gathering the best information possible with which to do this calibration. There certainly are uncertainties. And so one nice thing about this model is that we can run all sorts of sensitivity analysis to figure out how sensitive a particular result might be to, you know, a particular assumption about the evolution of technology, or fuel cost, or what have you. And actually a big one is the discount rate. Now that's another first order important feature, like the carbon price. Lots of scenarios. This is some of them. Probably from your point of view, the more interesting ones would be things like, well, what happens if you change the carbon price? So when we increase the carbon price, and we're considering 4 alternatives here, what's going to happen is the coal is going to retire more quickly. Gas is going to start to retire. We're going to get more renewables built more quickly. We're going to get more batteries, and when we're up at this end. And so the transition is going to happen faster. So for example, when Biden says, well, we're going to be zero emission electricity by 2035, we can say, well, what's the least cost in order to achieve that goal? Using the carbon price is going to get us there with least cost. What is that least cost?
how much does it cost to achieve this in 2035? How much would the cost be if we say had till 2040 or 2050 or 2030? So we can do that kind of analysis, which is, I think, very interesting. So encouraging demand response is another very interesting one. What if we had a faster uptake of electric vehicles, which would lead to a faster uptake in price responsive demand? That would be very interesting. So lots of interesting questions that we can ask. And so we're really excited about it. We actually haven't yet done all the analysis. We've just finished sort of the final version of the energy market model, and have now, we still have some work to polish the energy market proxy and the capacity market model, but we're very close to the finish line. And we're very excited about the results that we're going to get from the research in terms of the pace of the transition, the market efficiency, the reliability, and how much is it going to cost to do this. So this is to me, this is going to be a very nice tool with which to confront the policymakers with evidence that then they can help inform the decisions that they would make that otherwise might seem rather arbitrary. This is obviously a big project. We can also take this tool and integrate it with macro models that are thinking about the problem on a global basis. And that's what I want to talk about next, which is climate policy. So climate policy is something that Donald Trump has written about. In fact, I was sitting in London at a conference on carbon pricing when I saw this tweet. I don't get on Twitter, so I saw this in a newspaper. And I was actually so annoyed by this tweet that I decided to log into Twitter, which I almost never do, and tweet back. So that was my tweet back, which actually I think is probably truer than Trump's tweet, but I'll let you decide. So this is a topic I've thought about a lot together with my co-authors, Axel Ockenfels and Steve Stoft, who's at Berkeley, and then David McKay. He's actually, he's a great scientist in the UK, but unfortunately he recently passed away from cancer. But we wrote this book on global carbon pricing, which was basically trying to explain that global carbon pricing was the way to solve this huge cooperation problem that we have with global warming. Climate change is a cooperation problem. How can we get all the countries, or at least enough countries, to agree on a sensible policy that we actually do something about it? And the much of the rhetoric coming from the UN meetings has been that, well, it's actually, if people just act in their self-interest, it's going to take care of itself. And yes, costs of renewables have come down, but they haven't come down so much that it is going to take care of itself. We actually do need to do something. If we're going to stay, well below 2 degrees Celsius, which I think is a worthy goal. relying on things like a technological miracle is very risky. I don't think that we need to do that, and we wouldn't do that if we were rational. Some say that just if you look at local pollutants, that's motivation enough to reduce your greenhouse gases. And that, of course, is flawed too, because the social cost from the global pollutant is additive to the local damages. So we do need to do something beyond just the narrow self-interest. So the question that we focus on is, can cooperation be designed? That is, through a market design lens, can we figure out what the world should be talking about and come up with a method of cooperation that's more effective than meeting every year at the UN and then coming up with some proclamations? And the answer is yes, we can design cooperation. Economists and political scientists have a huge amount of experience in this. And the answer is reciprocity. Reciprocity is the key to cooperation in these social dilemmas, of which this is a major one. Elinor Ostrom won the Nobel Prize for her substantial work in this area. And it's very easy to see. So here's just a simple public goods game where which illustrates, I think, well the phenomenon. So individual commitments alone cannot promote cooperation. So here's a situation where I've got 10 players, individual endowment of $10 each, and each pledge of money will be doubled and distributed evenly to all players. Okay, so the first best is quite clear. Everybody pledges $10, the money gets doubled, and we're all made better off. But what happens in equilibrium in this game with individual commitments? Everybody reneges and hopes the others are going to pledge money, but I've got no interest in pledging myself because I'm only going to get a fraction back of my pledge. And so we get zero cooperation, all pledge zero, no cooperation. And that's a unique equilibrium. So, and this is pretty much what has happened so far with the individual commitments in Paris. People saying, okay, well, I'll do this, you do that, and so on. Without reciprocity to back it up, it doesn't work. And they've emphasized sort of an upward spiral of ambition, but this upward spiral of ambition is just not observed when we have individual commitments. When we run experiments, when we look at the field, we find a decay over time in cooperation. However, we can, with reciprocity, we can turn this game around and make it work. So we have the exact same setup, but now we're using reciprocity. I will if you will. The pledge is a commitment to reciprocally match the minimum pledge of the others. Okay, so then I'm pledging, but my pledge is contingent upon your pledging as well. Then there's a unique equilibrium, but the unique equilibrium is full cooperation. We all pledge $10. There's no risk because if somebody reneges, all of us are going to reduce our pledge because the pledge is made under the rubric of reciprocity. So this is what we need in climate negotiations. And then we'll actually accomplish something much stronger than what was accomplished in Paris. So in Paris, the world did come to an agreement that basically have this aspiration that we should be well below 2 degrees Celsius. So that sort of set a carbon budget. But we didn't, in Paris, have a plan with which to achieve that worthy goal. So it's very easy to just say, well, yes, let's do well below 2 degrees Celsius. but we have to say how to get there. And that's where we have to do more. So this goal is certainly, worthy. Bad things can happen when we get above 2 degrees Celsius. We're seeing the ramifications of that now. But how can we bridge the gulf between this worthy goal and our intentions? And simply asking for non-binding commitments with these intended nationally determined contributions is not going to do the job. We've done that, and they fall far short. Interesting, the United States is a funny case with Trump saying, well, how outrageous Paris is and how costly it is to us. And the reality is it's a non-binding agreement, so there's no cost at all. You get to do whatever you want. If you do carry out your intentions, they're just intentions. If you do carry them out, there might be some costs. Turns out in the United States, there were no costs to carrying out our intentions. Business as usual will carry out our intentions because of a low gas price and the fall which led to the retirement of a lot of coal units, and then the fall in price of solar and wind, which led to a lot of build of solar and wind. So, it's quite comical that he says how costly it is and outrageous and pulling us from it. I think yesterday was the first day that we actually exited Paris because we had to wait a year, but it's just absurd because it's actually costless to us. And we actually achieved our intentions, not by anything we actively did, but just by, good circumstance. The gas price happened to be so low and we're so far down the learning curve on wind and solar. So the solution in our minds is a global carbon price. Carbon price is the answer. Economists have been arguing for carbon price for a long time because it's the direct instrument that it can explicitly impact the billions of decisions that people make. So it encompasses, it induces a lot of innovation and it's efficient. It achieves any climate goal at least cost. And it's transparent. Everybody can see, the carbon price is $40 a ton. So this is, that's a very good measure of the intensity of my effort to reduce emissions. But what we emphasize is it actually promotes international cooperation. And that's what I'm going to talk about in my last 5 minutes, how it promotes international cooperation. And it is, first, it's price is a focal common commitment. If we see that $40 price, I see that you're doing a $40 price, I'll do $40 if you do $40. This is something that we can agree to, just like we can agree to the ambition of well below 2 degrees far off in the future. That was an easy thing to agree to. Similarly, a carbon price is an easier thing to agree to than agreeing that, okay, well, I get to emit this much and you get to emit that much. Because those two things, it's basically, that's just money that we're pushing around. And that's a nasty negotiation. I'm gonna say, I want more money, I wanna give you less money, and you're gonna say you want more money and leave less money for me. But if we're talking about a carbon price, then that's the intensity of effort rather than the directly impacting our cash flows. So that's sort of the basic reason why it's easier to talk about the carbon price than to talk about who's allowed how many emissions. Okay. So a price commitment also reduces risk. There's uncertainty in the world, and bad things can happen. For example, if we think of a 9/0 earthquake off of Japan, that had the impact of wiping out all their nuclear capability. They used a lot of nuclear energy, and that obliterated it in a matter of minutes. So then all of a sudden, what would happen? Well, they can't build nuclear quickly, And so they're having to use a lot more fossil fuels, which leads to a lot more emissions. So in a ETS system where we're trading emissions, this would mean that Japan would have to be buying lots of emission rights from the rest of the world. So in addition to having the 9/11 earthquake, then they'd have to send lots of money to other countries in order to pay for their much higher emissions than they had in the world where they were running all their nuclear plants. And by contrast, so that's if we use a quantity system like ETS, but using a carbon price, the carbon revenues stay within the country. So they're always within the particular country. And so it's, yes, there is some transfers, but all the transfers are within Japan. And so there's actually no need to go out to the rest of the world and pay them large sums of money. And that's how the price commitment reduces risks. One of the things you have to deal with is the asymmetries among the countries. So I agree, it's a huge problem. And we talk about how that can be done with a green fund, and there's lots of interesting work on that. The reality is the developed countries are going to have to pay for the emission abatements in countries like India that are much poorer, and Africa. And that's perfectly fine. The good news is paying for those abatements isn't that expensive. So, especially now, if you look at India, they're building a lot of wind and solar and all this stuff because it's least cost, not because they love the environment, but because it's least cost. And it also has these huge advantages for their local pollution. So you'd be surprised at how little we need to contribute to India and Brazil and African countries in order to induce them to, when they're investing in energy technologies, they're investing in zero emission technologies. So that's very good news. In the United States, and this is my last point, we actually have a number of proposals on the table in Congress. I think there's 8 pieces of legislation in Congress right now that propose a system of carbon pricing. The most sensible solutions involve carbon dividends, where a significant chunk of the carbon revenues coming from the carbon price are rebated back to consumers on a per capita basis. And the impact of that means that this is a win for almost everyone. So everybody but the wealthiest people are made better off, even ignoring the emission abatement, are made financially better off through the carbon pricing. Because basically the poorer you are, the less emissions that you're emitting. And so the less you're contributing the carbon revenues, but then you're getting a per capita share back. And so you're made better off. So that's a very good thing. So this is something that could be adopted either unilaterally by the United States or in concert with Europe or China or China. And that's my view, is that what we need is international negotiations focused on just a few major countries that agree to a sensible carbon pricing plan. And then it will expand more broadly, especially with the use of border carbon adjustments, which effectively force those that are importing carbon intensive goods or exporting carbon intensive goods into, let's say, the United States. We then would collect the carbon revenues on behalf of China if China didn't do this. And that essentially forces China to do this because they would rather collect their own carbon revenues rather than have the United States collect them for them. So I'm hopeful that we'll eventually get here, but there still is a lot of work. There is broad support for this. Even the energy companies, as you can see, like BP and ExxonMobil and Shell and so on, are all supportive of this because they're basically energy companies and they want to have an environment where they can invest in energy. And it's incredibly difficult to make sensible investments in energy when you're confronted with a chaotic climate policy. So that's why I think this is actually going to take off. Here's another proposal. So there's lots of them, but the key of this international negotiations is reciprocity. I will if you will. And so focus on a carbon price and then use a green fund to address asymmetries, and the world will be a much better place. So that's all for today. Tomorrow is our last class, and tomorrow we're going to focus on a few sectors. The first sector is going to be the transport sector, so transportation, and then we are going to switch and talk about financial markets. So that will be the plan for tomorrow. Thank you very much.